They found him on a low ridge between the God's Eye and the Blackwater Rush, surrounded by the wreck of his own army. He had offered to lay down his sword if only his men might be spared, and they had told him no. So the proudest knight of his age threw back his head and challenged all three of his enemies to single combat at once, daring them to face him blade to blade as a knight should. They would not give him even that. An archer drew, and two more beside him, and the famous morningstar never landed a single blow. 3 arrows found the man who had crowned a king, and the Kingmaker fell on a ridge the histories would name the Butcher's Ball. Born around 82 AC, dead in the bloody mud of the Riverlands in 130 AC, a steward's son who placed a crown upon a king's head. This is the complete story of Ser Criston Cole. But was Criston a hero, a monster, or simply the kingmaker who made a king and then died for the war he started? Welcome to Westeros Within, where we journey into forgotten ages, hidden legends, and ancient mysteries, heroes and monsters of Westeros. This is Ser Criston Cole, from her shield to her doom. He was born around the year 82 AC, far from the marble halls he would one day command, in the rough country of the Dornish Marches at the edge of the Stormlands. His birthplace was Blackhaven, the seat of House Dondarrion, and his father was the steward of that castle, a man who kept another lord's accounts. House Cole were small and minor, vassals of the Dondarrions, and Criston was lowborn in every way that mattered to the great lords of the realm. He was a steward's son, with no land of his own and no claim to glory, but the one he would carve out with his own 2 hands. And carve it he did. He grew tall and strong and famously handsome, with coal-black hair and pale green eyes, and he proved to be one of the most gifted fighters of his entire generation. His weapon of choice was the morningstar, a spiked flail that could shatter a helm and the skull beneath it. Remember that morningstar, for it returns at every dark turning of this story, like a drumbeat that will not be silenced. In 104 AC, a great tourney was held at Maidenpool to celebrate the accession of King Viserys I, and there a steward's son stepped out of obscurity and into legend. Criston won the melee outright, and in winning it, he did the thing the lords would talk of for years. With a single stroke of his morningstar, he knocked the Valyrian sword, Dark Sister, clean out of the hand of Prince Daemon Targaryen, the most dangerous man in the 7 kingdoms. But it was who he carried into the lists that set the tongues wagging. He rode wearing the favor of a little girl. The Princess Rhaenyra, the king's own heir, was perhaps 7 years old, and she had given her token to this handsome young knight. With her favor on his arm, Criston unhorsed Prince Daemon himself, and then both of the famous Cargyle twins, Sir Aric and Sir Eric of the Kingsguard, one after the other, before Lord Lymond Mallister finally put him down in the dust. And the laurel of victory, the crown of love and beauty, the young knight laid in the lap of the child who had favored him. It was a small thing. It would prove to be the seed of everything. A year later, in 105 AC, King Viserys raised Ser Criston Cole to the Kingsguard. He was 23, and he took the white cloak once worn by the legendary Sir Ryam Redwine, a seat among the 7 finest knights in the realm. And then the king did a thing both kind and fateful. To please his beloved daughter, Viserys named Ser Criston the Princess Rhaenyra's own personal sworn shield. A steward's son was now the constant companion and protector of the heir to the Iron Throne. The girl adored him. She called him her White Knight, and the two of them were rarely apart. Whether that adoration ever ripened into something the vows of a Kingsguard forbid is the great unanswered scandal of his life, and we will come to it, for it is the hinge upon which the whole man turns. But first, see him at the height of his loyalty. In 111 AC, at another great tourney, the colors that would one day name two armies first crystallized. Queen Alicent Hightower wore green that day, and Princess Rhaenyra wore black, and the court began quietly to choose sides. And Ser Criston Cole, still wearing the Princess Rhaenyra's favor, rode against all of Queen Alicent's champions and unhorsed every one of them. He emptied the saddles of two of the Queen's own cousins, and then of her youngest brother, Sir Gawain Hightower, into the dirt. On that day, there was no truer Black Knight in all the realm than Criston Cole. Mark that well. The man who would become the sword and shield of the Greens began as Rhaenyra's fiercest champion against them. The next year, in 112 AC, the old Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Harold Westerling, died, and Ser Criston Cole was named to succeed him as Lord Commander, the head of the White Cloaks. The Steward's son now commanded the finest knights in the world. His rise seemed without limit. And then, somewhere in the years that followed, something broke between him and the princess he had sworn to protect, and it broke so completely that it would help break the realm. This is the part of his story no one can tell you for certain, and so I will tell you both ways the histories tell it. Something happened around the time of Rhaenyra's marriage that turned her staunchest defender into her bitterest foe. The pious Septon Eustace tells it one way. The fool Mushroom tells it the very opposite. And on this, the chronicles will never be reconciled. By Septon Eustace's account, it was Criston who burned with a forbidden love. The knight, consumed by his feeling for the princess, slipped into Rhaenyra's bedchamber and confessed everything. He begged her to run away with him, across the narrow sea to one of the free cities, where he would cast aside his white cloak and pledge his sword to some merchant prince, and the two of them would live as man and wife. And Rhaenyra refused him. A Targaryen princess, she told him, was meant to be more than the wife of a hired sword. And if he could so easily forget the vows of his Kingsguard, she said, then he could just as easily forget his vows to her. In the harshest telling of Eustace, the wound went deeper still, that he had taken her maidenhead and then been scorned for it. Either way, the proud knight had offered her his life and his love, and she had turned him away. But the fool Mushroom swore the truth ran the other direction. In his telling, it was Rhaenyra who burned, and Rhaenyra who tried to seduce Criston, attempting it within the very walls of the White Sword Tower, the sworn brother's own home. And the horrified Criston, a true knight true to his vows, refused her. In this telling he is no jilted lover, but a man of unbending honor who would not break his oath even for a princess. So, which was it? The historian who set down these histories noted a weakness in the fool's version. Mushroom's tale cannot explain what came next. It cannot explain why a knight who had nobly refused a princess would then fly into a public, murderous fury and kill a man before the whole court. That kind of rage, the chronicler observed, reads far more like the wrath of a man who was rejected than the calm of a man who did the rejecting. And so the weight of it leans, just slightly, toward Eustace, toward a love spurned. But the truth was sealed in a bedchamber with no honest witness, and it has never been opened since. Whatever truly passed between them, the result was the same. The White Knight became the Black Foe. Rhaenyra departed for Driftmark and took a new sworn shield, the mighty Sir Harwin Strong, called Breakbones, and Criston Cole waited, with his honor or his heartbreak, for the day he could answer. That day came in 114 AC at a wedding. Princess Rhaenyra was married to Sir Leonor Velaryon, the young heir of Driftmark, and all agreed they made a handsome couple. At the celebratory tourney, the bride gave her favor to her new champion, Sir Harwin Strong, and the groom, who loved the company of men, laughingly gave his own favor to his lover, a gallant young knight named Sir Joffrey Lonmouth, whom men called the Knight of Kisses. Into that joyless joust rode Ser Criston Cole in a black fury. What happened next was not knightly. With his morningstar, the weapon that had won him all his glory, Criston Cole cracked open the helm of Sir Joffrey Lonmouth. The Knight of Kisses lingered 6 days, and then he died. And Joffrey was not the only one. In that black rampage, Criston left half a dozen good men broken and bleeding on the field. It was less a tourney than a slaughter wearing a tourney's clothes. Many at court were horrified, and King Viserys himself was furious. But one person was not displeased at all. Queen Alicent Hightower saw in this dangerous, brooding knight exactly the man she wanted, and she asked that Ser Criston be made her own personal sworn shield. And so the change was complete. From that day forward, Criston Cole was a green to the marrow of his bones, the devoted sword of Queen Alicent and her children, and the lifelong enemy of the princess he had once called his lady. The man who began as Rhaenyra's White Knight had become the architect of her doom. From her shield to her doom, in the space of a single bitter quarrel. For years the two factions circled in the long shadow of the old king. Criston commanded the White Cloaks and guarded the queen, and Rhaenyra and her party watched and waited. And then, in 129 AC, King Viserys I died in his sleep, and the steward's son seized the single moment that would make his name forever. On the morning the king was found dead, Queen Alicent and Ser Criston Cole did not grieve. They moved. They summoned the small council to the queen's own apartments, and there the Green Council resolved upon treason. Grand Maester Orwyle began, out of habit, to make arrangements for Rhaenyra's coronation, for she was the named and sworn heir. But Otto Hightower cut him off. First, he said, they must decide who would rule. And they decided. Not Rhaenyra, the heir the old king had named and made his lords swear to. They would crown her half-brother Aegon instead. But there was a problem. By the most cited account, that of Septon Eustace, Aegon himself refused. The prince insisted that Rhaenyra was the rightful heir, and that he had no wish to take her crown. And it was Ser Criston Cole who changed his mind. It was Criston, Eustace tells us, who went to the reluctant prince and made the argument that no man could answer. If Rhaenyra became queen, he said, she could never suffer her rivals to live. Aegon would die, his brothers would die, his mother, his sister, his own small children, all of them would be put to the sword to secure her throne. It was the crown or the grave for Aegon and everyone he loved. And only then did the prince yield. So the steward's son talked a frightened man onto a throne and lit the fire that would consume them all. On the 10th day of the 3rd moon of 129 AC, before the gathered city, the deed was done. They chose the Dragonpit upon the hill of Rhaenys for the great crowd it could hold. And there, with his own hands, Ser Criston Cole lifted the crown that Aegon the Conqueror himself had worn, and set it upon the prince's brow. He proclaimed him Aegon II of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Because Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, had defied the known will of his dead king and crowned the wrong heir, the histories gave him the name by which he is remembered to this day, Criston the Kingmaker. But a king made is not a king secure. Even as the Dragonpit roared, Ser Stefan Darklyn of the Kingsguard slipped away to Dragonstone, carrying the late King Viserys' own crown to Rhaenyra. The rightful heir refused to be cast aside. She was crowned upon her island in answer, and the realm split in two. The Dance of the Dragons, the war that would all but end the blood of old Valyria, had begun, and Criston Cole had struck the first spark. Now the Kingmaker had to win the war he had made. As Lord Commander and soon as Hand of the King, Criston Cole stood for a single doctrine: strike hard, strike fast, spill blood. His rival in council was old Otto Hightower, who counseled patience and letters and diplomacy. But while Otto wrote, the Blacks gathered strength, and Daemon Targaryen seized the great castle of Harrenhal, and lords across the realm declared for Rhaenyra. King Aegon grew to despise his grandfather's caution. Septon Eustace records the moment it came to a head. Catching Otto bent over yet another letter, the king knocked the inkpot into the old man's lap and told him to spill blood, not ink. That was Criston's creed made flesh, and Criston was the man to carry it out. So the Kingmaker marched. Out of King's Landing, he led a host of perhaps 100 knights, 500 men-at-arms, and near 1,800 sellswords, some 2,400 swords in all. And he made the Crown lands feel the weight of his new king's anger. He fell upon Rosby and Stokeworth, whose lords had only just bent the knee to Aegon to save their own necks, and he forced them to prove their loyalty by adding their men to his green host. Then he came to Duskendale. The walled harbor town never saw him coming. Criston took it completely by surprise. Lord Gunthor Darklyn was beheaded as a traitor, and most of his household knights, seeing how the wind blew, took service with Aegon II. The Kingmaker was teaching the realm what it cost to defy the crown he had made. But his masterstroke was yet to come, and it was a trap baited with a castle. Criston Cole planned and sprung an ambush at Rook's Rest. The plan was to draw out one of Rhaenyra's dragons and destroy it. He arranged for King Aegon himself, mounted on his golden dragon Sunfire, and Prince Aemond on the monstrous old Vagar, to lie hidden and wait. Then he moved against the castle as bait, and the bait was taken. To answer the threat came the Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, the woman they called the Queen Who Never Was, upon her dragon Maidenpool, the Red Queen. She fell upon Criston's host, and then the trap closed. Aegon and Aemond burst from hiding, and 3 dragons tore at one another 1,000 feet above the field. When Maidenpool closed her jaws on Sunfire's neck, Vagar struck from above, and all 3 came crashing to the earth in fire and ruin. When the smoke cleared, Princess Rhaenys and her dragon Maidenpool were dead. King Aegon and Golden Sunfire were savaged near to death and would never be whole again. But the field was a green victory, the first great victory of the war. Criston Cole had sprung his trap, and Rhaenys had come snatching at the bait, and the teeth had closed around her. It was the high point of the Kingmaker's career. But a maker of kings can also be the undoing of them. And Rook's Rest had a hidden cost. With Aegon crippled, his brother Prince Aemond became Prince Regent and protector of the realm, and Criston remained as Hand of the King under the new regency. The 2 of them, Hand and Regent, now led the war together, and their alliance would carry Criston to his death. In 130 AC, Criston Cole and Prince Aemond led the main Green Army, some 4,000 men, north out of King's Landing toward Harrenhal to take back the great castle Daemon held. They marched 19 days, and when they reached the vast haunted ruin, they found it empty. Daemon had slipped away on his dragon. The fortress was too large and too broken to hold with the men they had, and so, having marched all that way, they were forced to abandon it themselves. And there, in the shadow of Harren the Black's cursed towers, the alliance fractured. Criston, the foot commander, wanted to march the army south, back toward safety and the capital. But Prince Aemond refused to go with him. The young prince had his own design. He would take Vhagar and burn the Riverlands, torching every settlement loyal to the Blacks, hoping to bait Rhaenyra into sending a dragon to stop him. It was bold, and it was deadly, but it left Ser Criston Cole and his thousands of marching men with no dragon to guard them, alone and exposed in hostile country, crawling with their enemies. So the Kingmaker marched out of Harrenhal with about 3,600 men, having already bled 400 to raids and disease and desertion. He had crowned a king, won a great battle, served as the hand of the realm. And now he walked south through the Riverlands without a dragon at his back, and the River Lords were waiting for him. They caught him between the God's Eye and the Blackwater Rush. The trap that closed on the Trapmaker was sprung by the River Lords and the wild Northmen they called the Winter Wolves, under Roderick Dustin, the old Lord of Barrowton, the warrior men named Roddy the Ruin. With them rode Sir Garibald Grey and Sir Pate of Longleaf, and a deadly company of longbowmen led by a man called Red Rob Rivers. Criston's tired, dragonless column was ambushed and surrounded, and there was no escaping the ridge. So the Kingmaker made his end the way he had made his name, with defiance. Trapped and outnumbered, Criston Cole offered to yield, if only the Blacks would spare his men. They refused him, and so, rather than surrender to die, the steward's son, who had crowned a king, threw down a final challenge. He called out all 3 of the enemy commanders and offered to fight the 3 of them at once, alone, in single combat, daring them to face the morningstar that had felled princes. They would not. The famed knight was too dangerous to meet with honest steel. Instead, Sir Pate of Longleaf gave a quiet order, and Red Rob Rivers and 2 of his archers drew and loosed. 3 arrows struck the Kingmaker down, and the morningstar that had begun his legend at Maidenpool never rose again. With Criston dead, Lord Dustin sounded the charge, and the Winter Wolves and the River Knights fell upon the leaderless Greens and shattered them, cutting them down by the hundreds as they fled across the ridge. When it was over, Sir Garibald Grey looked out over the slaughtered host and spoke the line that would name the field. Today, he said, was butchery, not battle. And the fool Mushroom, hearing of it, christened the massacre the Butcher's Ball. They did not even leave the Kingmaker his rest. Sir Garibald Grey and Sir Pate took Criston Cole's head, mounted it upon a spear, and carried it as a trophy to the first Battle of Tumbleton. The man who had placed a crown on a king's head ended with his own head on a pike. His death was the high tide of Rhaenyra Targaryen's fortunes, the woman he had abandoned and helped to ruin. The Butcher's Ball is reckoned the most decisive single battle of the entire dance, the day the main Greenfield army was broken in the Riverlands. The Kingmaker had made his king, and the king's cause had spent him and thrown him away, and the war he started rolled on without him toward its own bitter end. So was Ser Criston Cole a hero, a monster, or a kingmaker? The histories cannot even agree on the man's own heart. Was he a knight of unbending honor who refused a princess and kept his vows, as the fool Mushroom would have it? Or a jilted lover whose wounded pride turned to murder and treason, as the pious Eustace tells it, and as that black fury at the wedding seems to whisper? Was the man who crowned Aegon a loyal protector, saving the queen's children from the axe? or the single hand that lit the deadliest war the realm had ever known. He was a steward's son who rose to command the finest knights in the world. He was a white knight who became a black foe. He was the kingmaker who took a crown that was not his to give and placed it on a head that did not wish to wear it. He gave his king a great victory at Rook's Rest, and he gave the realm a war that consumed a dynasty. And in the end, dragonless and surrounded on a nameless ridge, he died as defiant as he had lived, challenging 3 men at once and cut down by arrows before his morningstar could fall. From her shield to her doom, from a child's favor at Maidenpool to a crown in the Dragonpit to 3 arrows in the Riverland mud. That was Ser Criston Cole.